Now let's randomly seed activities for every hour to simplify our future testing, so that most of these select boxes will have selected activity. And in our case, from technical perspective, assign an activity ID to activity ID property of timeline item objects. So first of all, to do that, we have to find the function which generates timeline item objects. The function name is generate timeline items, which is called in here in the app component. So let's open up this function definition, and in here we're going to assign randomly selected activity ID to activity ID property of every timeline item object before it gets passed to timeline items array. And to know which activity IDs we can choose, we need to accept activities array as a parameter to this function. Let's call this parameter activities. And from app component, we're going to pass value of this activities array, which is stored within activities reactive variable. So we have to reference value property to access this array and send this as a parameter to generate timeline items function, like this. And now let's change order of these lines. Firstly, we declare activities array, and right after that, we declare timeline items array. And then let's go back to generate timeline items function definition and write logic to randomly select activity ID to be assigned to activity ID property. This can be done in many different ways, since this is just random selection. I'm gonna use the following approach. Let's divide our parameter by 4 and get remainder of this division, and then we'll check if the result is equal to 0. In this case, we're not going to assign activity to this particular timeline item object. So let's use null value in this case. Otherwise, we're going to pick random activity from activities array. And as an index, let's use the following expression. We'll divide hour by 2 and get remainder of this division. And then we're going to extract ID out of the received activity object. And as for activity seconds value, we're also going to get remainder of the division of hour by 4, compare this result with 0. If they're equal, we're going to use 0 seconds. Otherwise, we will multiply 15 by value of the constant seconds in minute and multiply by variable hour. And then we're going to get remainder of the division of this expression by seconds in hour constant. And in the browser, we will see that many of the select boxes in here now have random activity selected. And additionally, stopwatches show randomly chosen time. And of course, this whole UI is completely dependent on objects from timeline items array. So if we take a look at the values of properties of these objects, specifically activity ID and activity seconds, we will see that they contain specific values. And now that we have main part of our generation logic ready, let's do a refactoring for this part. We will try to rewrite this logic to reduce amount of code. So in here we can create an array by using array constructor. Let's pass amount of elements that we need in this array. We can get amount of elements from hours and day constant. And then we're going to get only keys of this array by using keys method. Then we're going to get all indexes of this array by using spread operator. And based on that, create new array, which we will iterate over by using map method. And on every iteration of this array, we will get specific index, which represents particular hour. And then we're gonna map these indexes into objects with 3 properties: hour, activity ID, and activity seconds. So let's copy over these 3 properties from here, insert it into our new object, and the old code can now easily be removed. And this way we haven't really changed any logic. We have just done a simple refactoring to minimize amount of code. But now we have a different problem. So for example, we want to remove some activity which is already selected in one of these select boxes. In this case, these select boxes should automatically reset their values, along with the measured time. The time should also be reset to 0. And to do this, we need to find a function which is responsible to delete activity. It is delete activity function within app component. So in here, before removing the activity, we're going over all timeline item objects. And if some timeline item objects contain activity ID which we're trying to remove, before removing activity, we are resetting activity ID property and assigning null. And the same thing we have to do with activity seconds property. So when we are removing particular activity, this activity seconds property should receive 0 value. And to do this, let's basically assign this value to activity seconds property, like so. And now let's see what will happen when we try to remove some activity, for example, activity reading, which is currently selected in one of the timeline items objects. Let's go ahead and do this, remove reading activity, then go back to timeline item page, and here we can see that those select boxes that previously had reading activity selected have their activity select box as well as time reset. And of course, corresponding timeline item objects would also have their properties reset, activity ID and activity seconds. At the end, let's go back to the code inside of functions.js file, and from here let's remove import of unused constant, midnight hour. And on that, we're finishing this lesson.